The blizzard hit Fort McDowell, Arizona, with such fury that Olivia Henderson could barely see her own hands gripping the reins of her struggling mare. And she knew with terrible certainty that she would die out here in this frozen wilderness if she did not find shelter within the next few minutes. The November storm of 1882 had come out of nowhere, transforming the high desert plateau into a white hell that swallowed everything in its path. She had been foolish to leave the settlement alone, but her pride and her desperation had driven her forward. And now that same pride might cost her everything. Her fingers were numb inside her gloves, her face stinging from the ice crystals that pelted her skin like tiny knives. The mare beneath her stumbled again, nearly throwing Olivia from the saddle, and she heard herself cry out in fear and frustration. She had left Fort McDowell 2 days ago with enough supplies for a week, planning to reach her sister in Prescott before the weather turned. But the storm had descended upon the high country with unexpected violence, catching her exposed and vulnerable on the open trail. Through the swirling white chaos, she glimpsed something dark against the snow. A structure. Her heart leaped with desperate hope as she urged her exhausted horse forward, praying it was not just another rock formation or her frozen mind playing tricks. As she drew closer, the shape solidified into a cabin, small and sturdy, built against the side of a rocky outcropping that provided some shelter from the screaming wind. Olivia half fell from her saddle, her legs nearly buckling when her feet hit the ground. She grabbed the mare's reins and stumbled toward the cabin, fighting against the wind that seemed determined to push her back into the storm's embrace. The door was latched but not locked, and she threw her weight against it, practically falling inside when it gave way. The warmth hit her like a physical force. A fire burned in the stone hearth, filling the small space with blessed heat and golden light. Olivia stood there gasping, snow falling from her coat and hat, her whole body trembling from cold and exhaustion and overwhelming relief. "Close the door before we both freeze." The voice came from the shadows beyond the firelight, deep and rough with pain. Olivia spun around, her hand instinctively reaching for the small pistol she carried in her coat pocket, and saw him. A man lay on a narrow cot against the far wall, his face pale and drawn, his dark hair matted with sweat despite the cabin's chill. Even from across the room, she could see the tight lines of pain around his mouth, the way he held himself rigid as if any movement might shatter him. "I said close the door," he repeated, his voice weaker this time. Olivia quickly pushed the door shut, dropping the latch into place. The sudden silence was almost as shocking as the warmth. The wind still howled outside, rattling the shutters and seeking any crack or crevice, but inside the cabin felt almost peaceful in comparison. "I am sorry," she said, removing her snow-covered hat with shaking fingers. "I did not know anyone was here. I would have called out, but I could barely think straight from the cold." The man studied her with eyes that even in his weakened state seemed to take in everything. They were blue, she noticed, the color of a summer sky, startling against his weathered face. He looked to be perhaps 27 or 28, with the lean, hard build of someone who had spent his life working outdoors. A cowboy, she guessed, or a rancher. "You picked the right cabin," he said, attempting something that might have been a smile. "Though I am not much for company at the moment." "Are you ill?" Olivia asked, moving closer but maintaining a careful distance. She was a respectable woman, unmarried and only 22 years old, and the impropriety of being alone with a strange man in an isolated cabin was not lost on her. But propriety seemed a distant concern when survival was at stake. "Shot," he said bluntly, 3 days ago, caught a bullet in my side from a cattle rustler who did not appreciate being chased off my property." Olivia's hand flew to her mouth. "You need a doctor," Well aware of that, madam. But as you might have noticed, there is a blizzard outside and the nearest doctor is 20 miles away in Fort McDowell. I was hoping to ride out when the weather cleared, but then this storm hit. He shifted slightly and winced, his jaw clenching. Been making peace with my situation. You mean you have been preparing to die, Olivia said, and the words came out sharper than she intended. Something about his resigned tone stirred anger in her chest, hot and fierce. She had not survived the storm only to watch a man give up, his eyes sharpened, focusing on her with new intensity. You got a better suggestion. Let me look at the wound, she said, already shrugging out of her heavy coat. Her traveling dress beneath was damp but not soaked through, and she felt her body beginning to thaw in the cabin's warmth. I am not a doctor, but I helped my mother tend to the sick and injured in our community for years before she passed. I know enough to tell if you are beyond help, or if there is something I can do. The man seemed to debate this for a long moment, pride warring with practicality across his face. Finally, he nodded. Name is Jackson Keller. This is my line cabin. I run cattle in the high country during the summer, use this place as a base. Olivia Henderson, she replied, moving to the crude table near the hearth where she could see medical supplies laid out, half-used bandages and a bottle of whiskey. I was traveling to Prescott to stay with my sister and her family. Obviously, I did not make it. Obviously, Jackson agreed, and there was a hint of dry humor in his voice despite his pain. Olivia washed her hands with water from a bucket near the fire, warming them before she approached the cot. I need to see the wound. Can you lift your shirt or should I cut it away? It is already cut, Jackson said, and carefully pulled aside the blanket covering him. His shirt had indeed been sliced open, revealing a bandage wrapped around his torso that was stained dark with blood. The bandage was damp, which was not a good sign. Working with as much gentleness as she could manage, Olivia unwrapped the bandage. The wound beneath was ugly, a ragged hole in the flesh just above his hip bone on the left side. The skin around it was inflamed and hot to the touch, and she could see that infection had begun to set in. The bullet, she asked, went clean through, thank God, came out my back. I managed to pack both sides, but... He trailed off, breathing hard from the pain of having the wound exposed. But you are alone and injured, and you did not have the strength to properly clean and dress it, Olivia finished. She sat back on her heels, thinking rapidly. The situation was serious but perhaps not hopeless. I need to clean this thoroughly. It is going to hurt. Everything already hurts, Jackson said. Do what you need to do. Over the next hour, Olivia worked with steady hands and fierce concentration. She boiled water, tore clean cloth from a spare shirt she found in Jackson's supplies, and used the whiskey liberally both to clean the wound and to help numb the pain. Jackson endured it all with gritted teeth and white-knuckled fists, occasionally letting out a low groan but never crying out or complaining. When she finally finished, applying a poultice made from herbs she found in his supplies and wrapping fresh bandages around his torso, they were both exhausted. Olivia cleaned up the soiled bandages and then collapsed into the single chair near the fire, suddenly aware of how drained she felt. You did good work, Jackson said quietly from the cot. His color looked better already, or perhaps that was just her hopeful imagination. Thank you. Do not thank me yet, Olivia replied. We need to keep the wound clean and watch for signs that the infection is spreading. You need rest and time to heal, and we need to pray that this storm passes before our supplies run out. As if in answer, the wind howled louder, rattling the shutters with renewed fury. Jackson's lips quirked. Sounds like we might be here a while. The reality of their situation began to sink in. Olivia was trapped in a tiny cabin with a stranger, a man she had met less than 2 hours ago, with no way to leave and no idea when the storm would break. It should have terrified her. Instead, she felt a strange sense of calm settling over her, as if some part of her recognized that she was exactly where she needed to be. "My horse," she said suddenly, starting to rise. "I left her outside." "There is a lean-to on the south side," Jackson said. "Should be sheltered enough if you can get her there. You will find grain in the bin." Olivia bundled back into her coat and forced herself back out into the storm. It took all her strength to lead the exhausted mare around the side of the cabin to the lean-to, where she found Jackson's own horse, already sheltered. She rubbed both animals down as best she could, gave them grain and water, and then fought her way back inside. This time when she closed the door, the cabin felt less like a refuge and more like home. She hung her coat to dry, checked on Jackson, who had fallen into an exhausted sleep, and began taking stock of their supplies. There was enough food for perhaps a week if they were careful, maybe less depending on how long the storm lasted. Coffee, bacon, dried beans, some hardtack, and a sack of cornmeal. Not luxury, but enough to survive. Night fell early, the storm darkening the world outside to an impenetrable blackness. Olivia made coffee and a simple meal of beans and bacon, and the smell woke Jackson. He tried to sit up, failed, and accepted her help with visible frustration. "I have been taking care of myself since I was 15, he said as she helped prop him against the wall with rolled blankets. "This is harder on my pride than my side." "Pride heals faster than bullet wounds," Olivia said, handing him a tin plate. "Eat. You need your strength." They ate in comfortable silence for a while, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the endless howl of wind outside. Finally, Jackson spoke. "You said you were traveling alone to Prescott. That is a long ride from Fort McDowell, especially this time of year. Dangerous for a woman alone." "I am aware," Olivia said, hearing the defensive edge in her own voice. "But I had my reasons." "Did not say you did not, just making conversation." She glanced at him and saw genuine curiosity in his expression, not judgment. Something in her chest loosened slightly. "My father died 6 months ago. Left our small ranch to my older brother, who promptly decided that what I needed was a husband. He had one all picked out, a merchant from town who is 45 years old and already buried 2 wives. "And you were not interested," Jackson said. "I was not interested," Olivia confirmed. "I wanted time to grieve, time to figure out what I wanted from my life, but my brother was insistent, said it was not proper for an unmarried woman to live alone, that I needed a man to take care of me." She laughed bitterly. "Never mind that I had been running our household and helping with the ranch work since our mother died when I was 16. Never mind that I can shoot, ride, and rope as well as any man." In his mind, I was helpless. "So you ran," Jackson said, and there was understanding in his voice. "So I ran," Olivia agreed. "To my sister in Prescott, hoping she and her husband might take me in until I could figure out my next step. I had saved a little money from selling eggs and preserves in town. I thought I could make my own way, maybe find work as a teacher or a seamstress. Something to give me independence." "Independence," Jackson repeated, rolling the word around like he was tasting it. "That is what I came out here for too. Worked as a ranch hand for other people for years, saved every penny, finally scraped together enough to buy some land and cattle of my own. This is my 3rd year running my own operation." He paused. "It is harder than I thought it would be, lonelier too. Do you regret it?" Olivia asked. Jackson was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. "No," he said finally. "It is mine. Every struggle, every setback, every small victory. It belongs to me and no one else. That means something." Olivia understood exactly what he meant, felt it resonate in her bones. They finished their meal and she helped him lie back down, checking his bandages before cleaning up. The cabin had only the one cot, and she eyed it with some concern. "You take the bed," Jackson said, reading her thoughts. "I will make a pallet on the floor." "You will do no such thing," Olivia replied firmly. "You are injured and need proper rest. I can sleep in the chair or make myself comfortable by the fire." "It is not proper for you to sleep on the floor while I take the bed," Jackson protested. "And it is not sensible for an injured man to give up his bed," Olivia countered. "I appreciate your concern for my comfort, but right now your health is more important than propriety. Besides, who is going to know or care out here?" Jackson looked like he wanted to argue further, but exhaustion was pulling at him. "You are a stubborn woman, Olivia Henderson." "I have been told that before," she said with a slight smile. "Usually not meant as a compliment." "I mean it as one," Jackson said, his eyes already drifting closed. "World needs more stubborn women." Olivia made herself as comfortable as she could in the chair, wrapping herself in a spare blanket. The fire burned low, and the wind continued its assault on the cabin, but inside there was warmth and relative safety. She watched Jackson sleep for a while, noting the rise and fall of his chest, the way his face relaxed in unconsciousness, the strong line of his jaw softened by firelight. He was handsome, she admitted to herself. More than that, there was something about him that called to her, some quality she could not quite name. Strength, certainly, but also a fundamental decency that showed in the way he had offered her his bed despite his own pain. The way he had spoken about independence, not with boastfulness but with quiet pride. She was being foolish, she told herself firmly. They were trapped together by circumstance, nothing more. When the storm passed, they would go their separate ways and likely never see each other again. There was no point in letting her imagination run wild, but as she finally drifted off to sleep, it was Jackson's blue eyes she saw in her dreams. Morning brought no relief from the storm. If anything, the wind seemed stronger, the snow falling even more heavily. When Olivia woke, stiff and sore from sleeping in the chair, she found Jackson awake and watching her. "How long have you been staring at me?" she asked, trying to sound annoyed but finding herself oddly pleased by the attention. "Not long," he said. "I was just thinking that you are real. Last night I half convinced myself I had dreamed you, that you were some fever vision brought on by infection." "I am quite real," Olivia assured him, standing and stretching. "How do you feel?" "Better than yesterday. Still hurts like hell, but better." She checked his wound and was relieved to find that the inflammation had decreased slightly. The infection was still present, but did not seem to be spreading. "You are improving," she said. "Keep resting and we might just keep you alive." "I would appreciate that," Jackson said dryly. They fell into a routine over the next several days as the storm raged on. Olivia tended to Jackson's wound twice daily, changing his bandages and applying fresh poultices. She cooked their simple meals, kept the fire going, and made trips to the lean-to to care for the horses. Jackson, frustrated by his enforced idleness, talked to pass the time. He told her about his ranch, 500 acres of high country grassland where he ran a small herd of cattle. He had built his main cabin himself, log by log, and was planning to expand it in the spring. He talked about his dreams of building a real ranch operation, maybe hiring some hands, breeding horses as well as cattle. "I always loved horses," he said, his eyes distant with memory. "My father was a horse trainer before he died. I was 12 years old. He taught me everything he knew about reading a horse's temperament, breaking them gentle instead of rough. I want to breed working horses that are smart and steady, the kind a cowboy can trust with his life." Olivia found herself telling him things she had never spoken aloud before. About her dreams of opening a school for ranch children who had no easy access to education. About the books she loved to read, borrowed from Fort McDowell's small lending library. About her mother, who had died of pneumonia and left a hole in their family that never quite healed. "She taught me to be strong," Olivia said quietly. "She told me that being a woman did not mean being weak or helpless, that I should never let anyone make me feel less than I was. My brother thought those were dangerous ideas. Maybe they are, or maybe they are necessary ones," Jackson said. "Out here, strength comes in different forms. Physical strength matters, sure, but so does the strength to survive harsh winters and failed crops and all the other hardships this land throws at you. Anyone who thinks women do not have that kind of strength is a fool." The way he said it, simple and matter-of-fact, made something warm bloom in Olivia's chest. She was not used to men who saw her as an equal, who respected her capabilities, instead of viewing them as aberrations or threats. On the fourth day of the storm, Jackson was strong enough to sit up on his own and take a few careful steps around the cabin. Olivia watched him move with a mixture of professional concern and something less clinical, something that made her very aware of the breadth of his shoulders, the way his muscles moved beneath his shirt. "Stop staring," Jackson said without turning around, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "I am not staring," Olivia protested, feeling heat rise to her cheeks. "I am monitoring my patient." "Your patient thinks you should take the cot tonight," Jackson said, turning to face her. "I can manage a bedroll on the floor now. You have been sleeping in that chair for days, and it is taking a toll." It was true that Olivia's back ached, and she had not had a proper night's sleep since arriving at the cabin. But the thought of taking Jackson's bed while he slept on the hard floor still felt wrong. "We could share it," she heard herself say, and then immediately wanted to take the words back. "I mean, it is large enough for two if we are careful. It would be more comfortable for both of us and better for your recovery. It would be purely practical." Jackson stared at her for a long moment, and Olivia could not read his expression. "That would not be proper," he said finally. "Nothing about this situation is proper," Olivia pointed out, trying to ignore the way her heart was racing. "We are already alone together, already breaking every rule of respectability. What difference does it make if we sleep on opposite sides of the same cot versus you sleeping on the floor? The difference is what people would think if they knew," Jackson said quietly. "Your reputation would be ruined." "My reputation is probably already ruined," Olivia said. "I am an unmarried woman who ran away from home and got caught in a storm with a bachelor cowboy. Whether we share a bed or not, the gossips will have their say." She met his eyes steadily. "I trust you, Jackson. I know you are a good man, and I am tired of letting fear of what others might think dictate my choices." Something shifted in Jackson's expression, a wall coming down. "I would never hurt you or take advantage," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "You have to know that." "I do know that," Olivia said softly. "That is why I suggested it." That night they lay on opposite sides of the narrow cot, careful not to touch, both acutely aware of every breath and movement. Olivia stared at the ceiling, her whole body tense, wondering if she had made a terrible mistake. But as the minutes passed and exhaustion finally began to pull at her, she felt herself relaxing. There was something comforting about not being alone, about hearing Jackson's steady breathing beside her, feeling the warmth of another human presence. "Olivia." Jackson's voice was barely a whisper in the darkness. "Yes. Thank you for trusting me." "Thank you for being trustworthy," she replied, and heard him exhale, something that might have been a laugh. She slept better that night than she had in days, and woke in the gray dawn light to find that sometime during the night they had gravitated toward each other. Her head rested on Jackson's shoulder, his arm curved protectively around her, and their fingers were loosely intertwined. Olivia knew she should move, should put proper distance between them, but she could not quite bring herself to break the contact. Jackson was still asleep, his face peaceful, and she took the opportunity to study him in the soft light. There were small scars on his weathered face, evidence of a hard life lived outdoors. Laugh lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled more than he frowned. A good face, she thought. An honest face. His eyes opened and he caught her watching him. For a moment neither of them moved, caught in that strange space between sleep and waking where normal rules seemed suspended. Then reality reasserted itself and they both pulled back, suddenly awkward. "I am sorry," Jackson said. "I did not mean to." "No, it is fine," Olivia said quickly. "We were asleep. It does not mean anything." But even as she said the words, she knew they were a lie. It did mean something. Everything about this situation meant something, though she was not quite ready to examine what. The storm finally began to break on the 6th day. The wind died down to a low moan, and the snow tapered off to occasional flurries. By afternoon, the sun broke through the clouds, turning the transformed landscape into a dazzling field of white that hurt to look at directly. "Tomorrow we should be able to dig out," Jackson said, standing at the window with Olivia beside him. "The drifts will be deep but manageable." "Yes," Olivia said, but the word felt hollow. She should be happy about the prospect of leaving, of continuing on to Prescott and her sister's home. Instead, she felt a strange dread settling in her stomach. Jackson seemed to sense her mood because he turned to look at her. "What are you thinking?" "That I do not want to leave," Olivia said before she could stop herself. Then, embarrassed by her admission, she added quickly, "I mean, it has been nice having company. This cabin will feel empty once I am gone." "It will feel empty because you will not be in it," Jackson said quietly. The simple honesty of the statement took her breath away. They stood there in silence, the unspoken truth hanging between them like a physical presence. Something had happened here in this small cabin during the long days and nights of the storm. Something neither of them was quite ready to name but could no longer ignore. "I should check your wound," Olivia said finally, needing to do something with her hands to break the tension that was pulling tighter with each passing moment. Jackson submitted to her examination without protest. The wound was healing cleanly now, the infection fully cleared. In another week or two he would be back to his normal strength. He no longer needed her care and they both knew it. "You did good work," Jackson said as she finished rewrapping the bandage. "I would have died without you." "You might have survived," Olivia said, but she knew he was right. If she had not come when she did, the infection would have spread and killed him. Jackson caught her hand as she started to pull away, his fingers warm and slightly rough around hers. "I do not believe in accidents," he said, his blue eyes intense on hers. "I think you were meant to find this cabin. I think you were meant to find me." "That is a dangerous thing to believe," Olivia whispered, but she did not pull her hand away. "I have been alone for 3 years," Jackson said. "Convinced myself I liked it that way, that independence meant not needing anyone. But these past days with you, I realized I was lying to myself. I do not want to be alone, not anymore, not when I know what it feels like to have you here." Olivia's heart was hammering so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. "Jackson, we barely know each other. This situation, being trapped together, it is not real life. Once we leave this cabin, I am going to court you properly," Jackson interrupted. "If you will let me. I am going to visit you in Prescott and take you for walks and ask your sister's husband for permission to call on you. I am going to do everything the right way, the respectable way, because I want everyone to know my intentions toward you are honorable." "And what are your intentions?" Olivia asked, barely able to force the words past the tightness in her throat. Jackson stood, pulling her up with him, and cupped her face gently in his hands. "To marry you if you will have me. To build a life together, a partnership where we are both free and both strong. To give you that school you dreamed about, and to breed horses with you by my side. To never make you feel like you are anything less than my equal." Tears were streaming down Olivia's face now, and she did not bother to wipe them away. "You are asking me to marry you, and we have known each other less than a week." "I am not asking yet," Jackson said with a slight smile. "Like you said, that would be rushing things. I am just telling you my intentions so there is no confusion about where this is heading. If you wanted to head there too." "I do," Olivia said, and then she was in his arms and he was kissing her, gentle and sweet and full of promise. His lips were warm against hers, and she felt something tight and scared in her chest finally unfurl and relax. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Jackson rested his forehead against hers. "I prayed you would come," he whispered. "That night when the fever was at its worst and I thought I might die. I prayed that someone would find me, that I would not end alone in this cabin with so many dreams still unfulfilled. And then you walked through that door like an answer I had not dared hope for." "I think we saved each other," Olivia said softly. "You gave me shelter from the storm. I gave you healing. But more than that, we gave each other hope." They spent that evening planning their future with the tentative excitement of two people who had stumbled into something unexpected and precious. Jackson talked about expanding his cabin, adding rooms for the children they both hoped to have someday. Olivia talked about starting small with her school, maybe teaching just a handful of children at first from neighboring ranches. "You could teach them here," Jackson said. "We could build a separate schoolhouse on the property. Nothing fancy at first, but good enough to start." "You would do that for me?" Olivia asked, touched by his immediate support of her dreams. "I would do anything for you," Jackson said simply. "That is what partnership means, is it not? Supporting each other's dreams, not just our own." That night they lay in the cot together without any pretense of maintaining distance. Olivia rested her head on Jackson's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, and felt more at peace than she had in years. Everything was still uncertain. They had challenges ahead, questions to answer, practicalities to work out. But none of that seemed to matter as much as this feeling of rightness, of having found someone who saw her and valued her exactly as she was. The next morning dawned clear and cold, the sun brilliant against the endless white landscape. Jackson and Olivia worked together to dig out the cabin door and clear a path to the lean-to. The horses were restless but healthy, eager to be moving again after days of confinement. "I should leave today," Olivia said as they stood in the cleared yard, looking out at the transformed landscape. "My sister will be worried sick. She will have expected me over a week ago." "I will ride with you," Jackson said. "I am strong enough now, and the route to Prescott is still dangerous after a storm like this. You should not travel alone." Part of Olivia wanted to protest that she could manage by herself, but she was learning that accepting help was not the same as admitting weakness. "I would appreciate the company," she said. They spent the afternoon preparing for the journey, packing supplies and making sure the cabin was secure. Jackson insisted on leaving the fire banked so any other travelers caught by the weather would have shelter and warmth. It was such a characteristic gesture that Olivia found herself falling even more in love with him. Love. The word no longer frightened her. She loved Jackson Keller, this cowboy who had stumbled into her life through pure chance and changed everything. She loved his strength and his gentleness, his dreams and his determination, the way he looked at her like she was something precious and powerful all at once. That evening, their last in the cabin that had become their whole world for a week, Jackson pulled something from his saddlebag. It was a small carved wooden horse, beautifully detailed despite its modest size. "My father made this," he said, pressing it into Olivia's hands. "He gave it to me the week before he died. Said it would remind me of what we could build together if I kept learning, kept trying. It has been my good luck charm ever since." "I cannot take this," Olivia protested, trying to give it back. "It is too precious." "That is why I want you to have it," Jackson said, closing her fingers around the carving. "So you will have a piece of me with you until I can come to Prescott. So you will know I am thinking of you, that my promises were not just words spoken in the isolation of a storm." Olivia clutched the wooden horse to her chest, overwhelmed by the gesture. "I will treasure it," she promised, "and I will be waiting for you." They kissed again, longer this time, and Olivia let herself sink into the feeling, memorizing every detail. The way Jackson's hands cradled her face like she was something breakable and precious. The soft catch of his breath when she pressed closer. The warmth of his body against hers, solid and real and exactly right. When they finally lay down to sleep, Olivia knew it would be their last night in the cot together, at least for a while. She pressed close to Jackson, breathing in his scent, feeling the rise and fall of his chest beneath her cheek. "I do not want to leave you," she whispered into the darkness. "Then we will make sure our separation is as brief as possible," Jackson replied, his arms tightening around her. "I will settle my affairs at my ranch and come to Prescott within the month. We will do this right, Olivia. We will build something that lasts. Promise me," she said. "I promise," Jackson replied and kissed the top of her head. "I will find you again. Nothing will keep me away." The journey to Prescott took 3 days through snow-covered terrain. Jackson proved to be an excellent traveling companion, patient and observant, pointing out landmarks and sharing stories to pass the time. They camped under the stars at night, maintaining a respectful distance, but always staying close enough to talk, to share the simple pleasure of each other's company. Olivia's sister, Martha, lived with her husband George and their 2 young children on a small farm outside Prescott. When Olivia and Jackson finally rode up to the modest house, Martha came running out, tears streaming down her face. "Thank God," Martha cried, pulling Olivia into a fierce embrace. "We heard about the storm and I was sure you were dead, frozen somewhere between here and Fort McDowell. George wanted to organize a search party, but the weather was too dangerous." "I survived," Olivia said, hugging her sister back. "Thanks to Mr. Keller here." She introduced Jackson, carefully keeping her tone neutral and respectable, but Martha was not fooled. Olivia could see the questions and speculation in her sister's eyes as Martha studied Jackson, taking in his courteous manner, and the way his gaze kept drifting back to Olivia. George proved to be a practical man in his early 30s, who wasted no time on excessive gratitude, but instead invited Jackson to stay for a meal and rest, before continuing to his own ranch. Over dinner, Jackson explained how Olivia had found his cabin and saved his life, omitting the more intimate details of their time together, but making it clear that he owed her a great debt. After the meal, George took Jackson aside for a private conversation. Olivia watched them through the window, her heart in her throat, wondering what was being said. Martha came to stand beside her. "He is in love with you," Martha said quietly. "Anyone with eyes can see it, and you are in love with him." "Yes," Olivia admitted, seeing no point in denial. "Is that terrible? Terrible. It is wonderful," Martha said, squeezing Olivia's hand. "A bit scandalous perhaps, given the circumstances, but wonderful all the same. Does he treat you well, better than well," Olivia said. "He treats me as an equal, Martha. He listens to my dreams and wants to help me achieve them. He does not see me as something to be controlled or managed, but as a partner." "Then he is a rare man indeed," Martha said. "Hold on to him, Olivia. Men like that do not come along often." When Jackson and George returned, both men were smiling. George shook Jackson's hand warmly and welcomed him to visit any time. Jackson said his goodbyes, promising to return within the month, and Olivia walked with him to where his horse was tied. "Your brother-in-law is a good man," Jackson said. "I told him my intentions regarding you. He said he would be honored to have me court his sister-in-law, but that the decision was ultimately yours." "And my decision should be obvious by now," Olivia said, blinking back tears. She had not expected the goodbye to be this hard. They had only known each other for a week, but it felt like losing a part of herself to watch him prepare to ride away. Jackson pulled her close, not caring who might be watching from the house. "1 month," he said firmly. "I will be back in 1 month with a proper proposal and a ring." "Can you wait that long?" "I would wait forever if I had to," Olivia said, "but I am very glad I only have to wait 1 month." He kissed her then, sweet and lingering, a promise sealed between them. Then he mounted his horse and rode away, turning back once to wave before disappearing down the road toward his ranch. Olivia stood watching long after he had gone, the wooden horse clutched in her pocket, already counting the days until she would see him again. The month that followed was both the longest and shortest of Olivia's life. She settled into her sister's household, helping with the children and the endless work of running a farm. Martha and George were kind and welcoming, never pressing Olivia to talk about her time in the cabin but clearly burning with curiosity. 2 weeks after her arrival, a letter came from Jackson. Olivia's hands shook as she opened it, drinking in his words like water after a long drought. He wrote about his ranch, about the work of repairing storm damage and caring for his cattle through the harsh winter. He wrote about his plans for spring, about the expansion he wanted to make to his cabin, and he wrote about missing her, about counting the days until he could see her again. Olivia wrote back immediately, filling pages with her own news and thoughts and feelings. She told him about her niece and nephew, about helping Martha with the sewing and cooking, about the books she had been reading from George's small collection. And she told him about her dreams for the school she wanted to start, ideas that had crystallized during her time in Prescott. The letters flew back and forth weekly, each one deepening their connection, proving that what they had found in the cabin was not some fleeting passion born of isolation, but something real and lasting. On the 28th day after they had parted, Olivia was in the garden helping Martha hang laundry when she heard the sound of hoofbeats. She turned to see Jackson riding up the lane, and her heart leaped so fiercely she thought it might break free from her chest. She did not care about propriety or what anyone might think. She dropped the sheet she was holding and ran to meet him, and Jackson was off his horse before it had fully stopped, catching her up in his arms and spinning her around. "You are early," Olivia laughed, clinging to his shoulders. "I could not wait any longer," Jackson admitted, setting her down but not releasing her. "I told myself I would be patient and proper, but every day without you felt like a year." Martha cleared her throat pointedly from the clothesline, and Olivia realized they were making quite a spectacle. But she could not bring herself to care, not when Jackson was here, solid and real and exactly as wonderful as she remembered. That evening, after a dinner where Jackson charmed Martha's children with stories about his ranch and impressed George with his knowledge of farming and animal husbandry, Jackson formally asked George for permission to court Olivia. George gave it readily, and then tactfully suggested that he and Martha take the children for a walk to give the couple some privacy. When they were finally alone, Jackson took both of Olivia's hands in his. "I know I said I would wait, that I would court you properly for a respectable period of time. But I need to ask you something now tonight, because I have carried this question with me every minute of every day since we parted." He dropped to one knee, pulling a simple gold ring from his pocket. "Olivia Henderson, you saved my life in that cabin. But more than that, you showed me what life could be, what partnership and respect and true equality look like. I love you with everything I am, and I want to spend the rest of my days proving that love to you. Will you marry me?" Olivia had known this moment was coming, had rehearsed her answer 100 times in her mind. But now that it was here, all her careful words deserted her. She could only nod, tears streaming down her face, and whisper, "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes." Jackson slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. Then he was standing and kissing her, and Olivia felt the last piece of her guarded heart fall away, surrendering completely to the man who had seen her not as something to possess, but as someone to cherish. They were married 6 weeks later in Prescott's small church, with Martha and George standing as witnesses and half the town in attendance. Olivia wore a simple blue dress that Martha had helped her sew, and Jackson wore his best suit, looking handsome and slightly uncomfortable in clothing meant for special occasions rather than ranch work. The ceremony was brief, but heartfelt. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Jackson kissed Olivia with such tender joy that several women in the congregation sighed audibly. The wedding breakfast afterward was a modest affair, but filled with warmth and good wishes from people who were already coming to know and respect the couple. That evening, Jackson brought Olivia home to his ranch for the first time as his wife. The main cabin was small but well built, with clear evidence of Jackson's hard work and pride of ownership. He had cleaned and organized everything, added new curtains to the windows, stocked the shelves with supplies. "It is not much yet," he said, suddenly nervous. "But we will make it into something wonderful together." "It is perfect," Olivia said honestly, looking around at the space that would be her home. She could already see the changes they would make, the improvements and expansions, the life they would build within these walls. Their wedding night was tender and sweet, an exploration of new intimacy tempered with gentleness and care. Jackson was patient and loving, and Olivia felt herself falling even deeper in love with this man who had stumbled into her life during a blizzard and changed everything. In the days and weeks that followed, they settled into married life with surprising ease. Olivia threw herself into learning the rhythms of ranch life, working alongside Jackson to care for the cattle and horses. She had been right that she was capable of the work, but she also learned to accept Jackson's help when she needed it, understanding that partnership meant both giving and receiving support. Jackson, true to his word, began making plans for the school. That first summer, he cleared land for a separate building and started gathering materials. By fall, they had the frame of a one-room schoolhouse standing on a rise overlooking the ranch, and Olivia had begun spreading word to neighboring families that she would be offering instruction to any children who could make the journey. The school opened the following spring with 7 students, ranging in age from 6 to 14. Olivia loved the work, loved watching young minds engage with new ideas and information. Jackson built desks and helped maintain the schoolhouse, often stopping by during the day to bring Olivia lunch and check on the students. Their first child was born in the autumn of 1884, a healthy boy they named James after Jackson's father. Olivia took a brief break from teaching for the birth, but was back in the schoolhouse within months, James sleeping in a cradle near her desk while she led lessons. Life was not always easy. There were harsh winters and dry summers, cattle lost to disease or predators, the endless struggle of making a ranch profitable in difficult country. But through it all, Jackson and Olivia faced their challenges together, never letting hardship drive a wedge between them. 2 years after James came twin daughters, Catherine and Emily, who kept their parents constantly exhausted but deeply joyful. Olivia had to temporarily close the school while the twins were infants, but she reopened it a year later, now with Martha's oldest daughter coming to help care for the children during school hours. Jackson's horse breeding program began to thrive. His reputation for training gentle, intelligent working horses spread throughout the territory, and he found himself with more buyers than he could supply. He hired 2 ranch hands to help with the work, young men who lived in a bunkhouse Jackson built near the main cabin. By their 5th anniversary, the original small cabin had been expanded into a proper ranch house with multiple bedrooms, a large kitchen, and even a parlor with real glass windows. The school now served 15 students, and Olivia had hired an assistant teacher, a young woman from Fort McDowell who shared her passion for education. On the evening of their anniversary, after the children were asleep and the ranch work done for the day, Jackson and Olivia sat on the porch of their home, watching the sun set over the land they had built together. "You ever think about that storm?" Olivia asked, leaning against Jackson's shoulder. "About how differently things might have turned out if I had not found your cabin." "I think about it all the time," Jackson admitted. "I think about how close I came to dying alone, how close you came to freezing in the storm. The odds of you finding that specific cabin at that specific moment." He shook his head. "It feels impossible, miraculous." "I prayed you would come," Olivia quoted softly, remembering his words from that night in the cabin. "That is what you said to me. That you had prayed for someone to find you." "And you did," Jackson said, turning to kiss her temple. "You found me and saved me and gave me everything I did not even know I was missing. A partner, a family, a purpose beyond just surviving. You gave me a life worth living." "We gave that to each other," Olivia corrected, taking his hand and intertwining their fingers. "Neither of us would be here without the other. That is what makes it real, what makes it last. We chose each other and we keep choosing each other every single day." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky. Inside the house, one of the twins cried out in her sleep and then settled again. A horse nickered from the corral. The land around them was peaceful and quiet, full of the potential of everything they were still building together. Years continued to pass, bringing changes and challenges, but always rooted in the deep love and respect that had first bloomed in a small cabin during a winter storm. James grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved books as much as horses, and eventually became a teacher himself. Catherine inherited her father's gift with animals and took over the horse breeding operation. Emily, wild and free-spirited, shocked everyone by becoming a doctor, the first woman physician in the territory. Jackson and Olivia grew old together, their hair turning silver, their hands gnarled from years of hard work, but their love never diminishing. They celebrated 50 years of marriage surrounded by children and grandchildren, a testament to everything they had built from that chance meeting in the wilderness. The school Olivia had founded continued to operate, eventually growing into a proper institution that served families throughout the region. The ranch Jackson had worked so hard to establish became one of the most respected horse breeding operations in Arizona. But more than any individual achievement, their legacy was the model of partnership they had created. the proof that love based on equality and mutual respect could not only survive but flourish. In the winter of 1935, Jackson Keller passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 80, with Olivia holding his hand. She mourned him deeply, but without despair, knowing they had been blessed with more years together than most people could ever hope for. She lived 3 more years, long enough to see her youngest grandchild married, and then followed Jackson into whatever lay beyond. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch, their graves marked with simple stones that bore their names and the dates of their long lives. But their true monument was the family they had created, the school that still taught children, the ranch that still bred fine horses, and the story passed down through generations of how a winter storm had trapped them together and changed everything. Because sometimes the worst storms bring the greatest gifts. Sometimes being lost is the only way to find what you have been searching for all along. And sometimes a desperate prayer whispered in the darkness is answered in ways more wonderful than we could ever imagine. Jackson had prayed for someone to find him, and Olivia had. But she had also been praying, though she had not realized it at the time, for someone who would see her for who she truly was and love her not despite her strength, but because of it. They had found each other in the wilderness, 2 lost souls seeking shelter from different kinds of storms, and together they had built something that lasted far beyond their own lives. Their story became legend in the high country of Arizona, told and retold with embellishments and romanticism, but at its heart always the same simple truth. 2 people, trapped together by circumstance, who chose to transform that accident of fate into a lifetime of love. 2 people who proved that real partnership was possible, that love could be both passionate and respectful, consuming and sustaining. And on cold winter nights when the wind howled and snow fell on the high desert plateau, people still told the story of Jackson and Olivia, the cowboy and the woman who found each other in a blizzard and built an empire of love that no storm could ever destroy.